Welcome. Thanks for tuning in.
Zanna,
Miranda.
time for our next podcast.
Yes.
The value of direct feedback is highly overrated.
Yes. A nice, bluntly, exactly topic once again.
Yeah, I think so. Let's start as we always start. Why this podcast?
Yeah, so indeed, you already said so what I see that companies that are about to embark on their CX journey or they've just started, let's say it's year one, almost all of them start with, well, first of all, looking for a survey tooling solution, but also almost all of them start with what's called direct feedback. And because so many start there, I felt it's really important to discuss today, why are so many companies starting there, but also what are the risks associated and when should you use it and what should you be careful about when implementing direct feedback. So especially I think, I was going to say especially when you're just starting out with CX, but I also see more, let's say companies that are longer in CX, they're still adopting this direct feedback. So I think it's super relevant for all the listeners, of course.
I think so as well. All right. What is direct feedback?
So direct feedback to me, and you can also hear the term closed feedback loop, that's the same. So in essence, what we mean with direct feedback is you run a survey, often it's an NPS survey, and then you respond individually to the people who give a low score. So often in the NPS context, where you have a score from 0 to 10, and 0 to 6 are called the detractors. What companies tend to do is that they say, okay, everybody that rates us between a 0 and a 6, we're going to reach out to them to just ask, hey, what went wrong and how can we solve it and enhance the score. And then some, but not a lot of companies also do, let's say, a second feedback loop where they ask, okay, everybody that we reached out to, how satisfied are they now after us reaching out to them again? So that's the essence of direct feedback or closed feedback loop is, hey, everybody that gives a score, often it's negative. You can also, of course, do the same, right? Everybody that rates us a 9 and 10, just, call them and thank them. Yeah. That's also a cool way of using it. But yeah, it tends to be, hey, let's focus on the people that were not happy and how can we individually check what's going on and make them happy again.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So what are the issues with direct feedback?
I think one of the two issues. One is the impact tends to be overrated, which I'll explain with a calculation in a minute. But I think also the operational execution of direct feedback is super challenging. Because when you look at the history of direct feedback, so it stems also from the origination of the Net Promoter Score, and that originated from a B2B context. Mm-hmm. So originally the idea was, okay, I'm asking my B2B customers, how happy are you? And then they figured out that the score about, recommendation was connected to profitability of the customer. So they saw, hey, everybody that rates us a high score are more profitable. So let's make sure that we get customers to higher scores. So in that B2B context, what they did was, okay, so we send a survey. And then when customers are not happy, we send that feedback from that customers to the connecting account manager. And then the account manager would contact the customer.
Yeah.
Makes absolute sense, right? Because I was also reflecting when we were preparing this podcast, what are we trying to do with direct feedback, right? So let's say that, and with surveys in general, right? So we're sending out a lot of surveys. We're often not doing something with the individual respondents, right? We're just learning from it. So I was also thinking, okay, let's say that, I don't know, my husband tells me, Zanna, okay, I need to figure out an example. That's super hypothetical. Maybe I'm not so happy about you Netflixing all day. And then my response, if it would be a survey, would be, I would respond absolutely not. Or I would say, thank you, and then just not act on it, right? Which is not a very nice experience for the person giving feedback. But then, of course, the problem was, so normally when you have a smaller company or B2B, you're in contact a lot. So the person just gives feedback. Hey, that offer was not what we expected. But then we started to scale, and that's where we started using surveys. So now you have this weird situation where you want to try to replicate that experience. Of course, when you give me feedback, I want to learn and listen and take you seriously. Versus, I have now 1 million customers, and I cannot do that in the same way. Right? So I think when you go back to let's say the principles behind this is, okay, ideally, every customer that tells me that they're not happy, I want to acknowledge that and do something about it. And then how can we replicate this at scale without, we cannot call back 100,000 customers every day. But we want to figure out the best way of using that data to enhance the experience of customers.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think also for me, that's also a bridge to, let me revert back to the operational challenge. Right? So because we are now scaling, let's say you have 100,000 customers calling you every day and you're sending service about the call center. That means that you need to have a technology that's going to route all the negative feedback to either a group of agents or a team, or as somebody needs to actually start calling those people back.
Yeah.
And what I tend to see is that that's really a challenge. In a call center, it might be manageable because you can plan, right? You can plan, hey, this team, this hour is going to reach out to customers. But especially if you're doing it with other departments that are less customer focused, you hear a lot of complaints from the organization, hey, nobody's actually following up on these calls, right? So that's also relevant for the impact. So the title of the podcast is, right, it's Overrated. And okay, I'm noticing that I'm not super structured because I'm not also thinking about what you just keep me saying. If you don't longer follow the story, Miranda, just to shoot me.
Of course, no worries.
So why are so many companies starting out with this, right? So if they're starting with CX or just measuring the call center, they almost always start with the one question open text and direct feedback. And I think that's partially because the tooling companies, right? Because you can almost no longer do this at scale without a survey tooling company. And of course, the value that the survey tooling company tends to PR is their technical skills. Right? Hey, we can super easily route all these messages to the right agent, so you don't have to do that manually. Or also they are PRing, but we have this amazing analysis engine, right? And that tends to be also a reason why they price it at a certain level. So there's an incentive for survey tooling companies to push for this, right? Because let's say if you're not doing direct feedback, and maybe you're just sending a survey once a month with the questions that matter most, that's technically super easy, right? So maybe you don't need a sexy dashboard and tooling company. So as I always say in all the podcasts, our goal with these podcasts is to educate you on, let's say, the benefits and the risks. So you can make better decisions and in choosing the survey tool in this case, or in instructing them in how they can add the most value to you.
Yeah. But when they are pushing this, it sounds really nice, right? Because every customer that is unhappy will receive a phone call, and hopefully he will be happy again.
Yes.
So what's the risk of why is it highly overrated?
Yeah, so that's indeed the dream, right? It's being sold as, hey, but of course it's amazing. I'm a customer of this super large company. They probably don't know me, and hey, they are reaching out to me. That's the dream, but let's do a nice calculation about the reality. So what I tend to do when I meet companies that are working with direct feedback or are really believers that that's the best way to go, I say, okay, let's humor me, right? Let's do this calculation together. So the first thing I always say is, let's assume that you're sending out surveys to 100% of your customers. And that's already way lower, right? So the calculation I'm making is already like a max. It will be way lower in reality. But let's assume 100% of customers are getting a survey. Let's assume that 20% responds, which is pretty high, right? In reality, it's between 5 or 10%. Let's assume that 25% is unhappy, which is also relatively high. That means that if you calculate that only 5% of your customers, max, right? So in reality, maybe it's, half or 1%, are actually eligible for direct feedback, then realize that a lot of employees are maybe not following up. So the percentage of customers that is actually contacted is actually experiencing, wow, they're reaching out to me based on my individual feedback, is super low.
Yeah. And
then,
what about the story? Because then I can say, as an organization who does direct feedback, yeah, okay, it's 5% max. But I also learn from this feedback and make sure it won't happen to other customers.
yeah. And that's where, so that's a valid point. And then what I tend to say, maybe you've also learned about this from our previous podcasts, is that, of course, you can then collect and ask every person that you are reaching, hey, what made you unhappy? So you get a list of causes of customers being dissatisfied. But then you have the risk of, I remember our story always about, if you want to find the real drivers, you have the risk of rational feedback. So customers think that that was the reason why they were unhappy. And the latent, often more emotional needs. And I think the nice example is when you call people, let's say in hindsight, why are you unhappy? Yeah, it was the price, for example. But it's never the price. For the same sake as for employees, it's never the salary. But something has happened before that makes you now decide it's not worth it, right? It's about value. What made it not worth it? Well, maybe, I didn't feel treated well by that company. But that's very difficult to get out of a direct response, because the direct response is often super transactional.
Yeah. All right. So, no direct feedback. Maybe for the high value customers, right? As you told us with the NPS and the original thought behind this.
Yeah, so I think indeed, if you do it, so I started in CRM like 25 years ago. And then you had the idea of, you have like gold, platinum, bronze. So you arrange customers based on the value that they have. Or if you're a B2B with very high-end customers also. And so if you do direct feedback, just indeed make very smart choices. Okay, in which context and for which segments does it make sense? Because let's say if I have a B2B and I have, 20 super high-end customers, well, then maybe you should not survey them, right? You should talk to them.
Yeah,
exactly. That's a different topic. I think you want to sort of, tag in your CRM, hey, but if these customers aren't happy, I definitely want to know and I definitely want to reach out.
Yeah. For all the other customers,
yes.
What should we do instead?
So I think what you should do instead is that, so most organizations start out measuring, let's say, their channels, right? So they measure customer service, calling, email, etc. So side note, I still see a lot of companies that are not realizing, hey, but next to channels, we also have journeys. There's still a lot of win to be gained for companies to realize it's a matrix, right? I have journeys and I have channels. But focusing on the channel side, the advice there is to, I would say, not use direct feedback at all. That would be my advice. But indeed, if you do it for the high value. And make smart choices, right? Make strategic choices when to use it. But especially on the channel side, we have developed in the last 15 years driver-based surveys. And so remember from our other podcast, what do? We use smart statistics to figure out, okay, looking at when customers call, should we lower the waiting time? Should we be more friendly? And so what really drives the experience of calling? What really drives the experience of email or complaints? And we've, let's say, open sourced those, right? So if you feel, hey, these surveys are relevant, let us know. We're happy to share them. We've used them in so many different contexts across so many years that we are, I can fairly say these are standard surveys that you can use. And then you see that the human aspect tends to be, 2-3 times more impactful for sure than waiting time. Questions like first time fix are important drivers. So are you answering my call in one go? But also a question that almost nobody is using is a question that we've labeled first time right. So that's not answering the call in one go, but that's the question, dear customer, do you feel we could have prevented this contact? That's an amazing one, right? Yeah, it's a beautiful question for a business case. No more assumptions, like 30%, right? 30 of customers tend to say, yeah. Recently we had a company where 40% of customers were saying yes. And not just in the call center, but also in the shops. So just seeing that amazing potential for enhancing the experience and creating so much more time, right? So it's a double, I'm not sure if double whammy should be the correct word, but it's a double positive impact.
Yeah.
I'm preventing you a trip to the shop, or I'm preventing a call. That already makes me happy. But and reducing costs, so that's the win-win. But at the same time, when I do call, now you have more time to spend it with me, or when I do visit, on the things that matter to me, right? So I'm less unhappy because I don't have to call because, I don't know, the website is not working. And I'm extra happy, right? You're satisfying me even more because you're spending more quality time with me.
Yeah.
So it's a win-win, après-ski, yin-yang, amazing idea.
All right. So use these surveys.
Yes, definitely. And indeed, if you want them, just reach out to us and we're happy to share them.
Yeah. All right. I think we discussed a lot. Anything else? Maybe some final tip?
Let me check, because I think I wrote the final tip down. Let me do a quick check. No, the final check was indeed that we have these surveys available. So no, I think indeed we've covered everything.
Nice. All right. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And see you next time.
See you next time.